So here we are back with part two of this, undercover going into the Vaccine Congress event here with Dr. Madhava Setty. The first part is already out there. You can check it out. This is going to sort of expand on what happened in the second day. A lot of really, really compelling stuff here. So stay tuned. Madhava, what's the first thing you want to tell us about the second day here?
Well, this is, it was a 4-day conference, and I spoke to your audience after the first 3 days. And
Okay.
what I'd like to do now is sort of wrap the whole thing up and hit the points that we may have missed right after I walked out of the conference room on Wednesday, because I think a lot of interesting things have happened, and we can summarize them right now if you're interested.
Yeah.
The first is during the opening statements. It was opened up by Gregory Poland, who is a physician, and he is the head of vaccine research at the Mayo Clinic. We talked about him last time. And what's interesting about his story is that he suffered tinnitus, which is a debilitating condition where you have ringing in your ears constantly. And it began after he got injected with an mRNA vaccine. And I was able to talk to him personally at the end of the conference just to see how he was doing. Did he get better? What's going on? And he said, no, it hasn't gotten better at all. It has not relented. It's a pain. It's annoying, especially in a car with the windows open, and it's constant. And he was, in not knowing this at the beginning of the conference, he was the one that's saying, these are the greatest products ever made. And so that was, I think, for me at least, nonsensical, without any, mitigating language about there are side effects. Let's remember that, that could be the reason why people aren't getting them. This was also the time in the very first hour, the plenary session, where they talk about what their plans are and what the challenges are. And the challenges, from the very beginning, are saying we need to deal with vaccine hesitancy. And that was the theme for half of the conference. And I'm going to talk about that later with some of the other interactions I've had. But on stage with him in that first hour was Peter Marks, who is the head of CBER, the Center for Biologics Evaluation Research at the FDA. He's a big person in the regulatory sphere, sits on the VRB pack of the FDA. And he made it very clear that COVID shots are going to be an annual thing, maybe biannual, but probably annual, meaning once a year. And they want to be able to identify the strains that they want to protect us against, and then within 100 days start deploying a vaccine. That was the goal. That is their goal. And he was up on stage with a bunch of people in the industry, and there was sort of a nodding of heads when he said, but we need to have manufacturing capacity ready to go. And the other folks were like, yep, yeah, we're behind you, Peter, Yeah. So they made it very clear, where this is going and what we should be expecting. And he was also very clear that preventing infections is an unattainable goal. There's never going to be a sterilizing vaccine, as far as you could tell.
Yeah.
Maybe, long time in the future, but that's not one of his goals.
Right. And interestingly,
right?
That anecdote is actually supported by the recent Pfizer, I believe it was the fourth quarter earnings presentation that they made in 2022. And there's a slide here. You can actually, the viewers will be able to see this, but they're talking about also having a COVID flu combo vaccine, and they're talking about this rise of uptake and the rise in profits. You can see that they are planning for having this to be yearly messaging, and even their plans are, they think that the uptake of these vaccines, for example in 2026, is going to be greater than COVID was alone in 2022, meaning they have plans, that it's in their plan for sure that they want to get this out as much as possible. So that totally makes sense.
Yes, that's what they want to do. So from there, I went to the very first roundtable, which was very interesting to me, which was about how to, one of many roundtables about how to get rid of misinformation and misinformation spreaders. and it was attended by maybe about 35 people. And, I was just chomping at the bit saying, okay, this is where we're going to talk about what the real issue is. How do we engage our side in these kinds of discussions? And that's exactly what I brought up. As I mentioned a couple of days ago in the previous video, I was like, look, you failed. You're not going to convert the people who still are vaccine hesitant because you're not answering their questions. Why not bring on an expert from our side, not the layperson off the street who has a friend who has a nurse who saw a vaccine injury and therefore they're not getting vaccinated. The straw man argument that they go to. It's like, oh, well, where did you go to medical school? Have you, like that's how they dismiss us, rather than saying, oh, Peter McCullough, tell us what you found out about myocarditis.
Yeah. Never
want to do that. And I'm saying this is the time to do it. You've got everybody else vaccinated with your little trinkets that you've offered. Bring on the people. And immediately, a very interesting person in this conference, Katie Atwell, who is a researcher, professor from Western Australia, stood up and said, unequivocally, no, that is going to be a mistake. It is going to be an absolute mistake because that's going to empower them. So we hit this before, but what's new here is what we didn't bring up the last time I spoke to you, Joe, was there's another guy there who was basically the authority about this. And I don't remember his name, but I shared with you a poster that...
Was it Christopher Graves by any chance?
Yes, Christopher Graves, that's it.
Yeah.
Really friendly guy, gregarious, and he offered his explanation. It's like, oh, this is a pathology of behavior. That's the reason why people don't want to get vaccinated, is that they have some sort of deficiencies, and we have to understand their problems and their issues a little bit better. And he conducted a lot of research into this, sampling 3,000 vaccine-hesitant adults, asking them a variety of questions about why they didn't want to get vaccinated, and other questions that speak to their, behavioral predilections. And, made this amazing chart of, an array of here are the issues and over here are all of the problems that they have with society or hyper-religiosity, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure if we can, show our audience this, but I'll just read off. This is very interesting, the rows. Here are some of the issues that people have. It's the nuance. I'm not anti-vax. I'm just saying, one, I believe some vaccines are important, but not all. I'm concerned we are giving our children too many vaccines at a time. I think vaccines are more dangerous than people say, and they may be afraid to admit it. I'm scared of the ingredients in common vaccines. I worry that vaccines make my child sick. I would rather wait and see how everyone else does first. So, those are really legitimate questions.
Yeah.
Right? The subtlety of the vaccine resistant position, but then he maps them over to, people who are concrete thinkers. That particular question resonates more with them. And then he comes up with, through this research, what is the proper way to address each kind of person in terms of what is their biases, if you will, and what is the issue they have.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make here is that they're pathologizing the anti-vax position.
Yeah.
Right? They're they believe this is like a disease that they can treat with the proper messaging. And we had a very long discussion afterwards, and and I was like, so yeah, this is very, very interesting research. It is actually very interesting research because it gives us an idea of how they're thinking.
Yeah.
And I said, so Christopher, how would you address someone who said, look, the trials demonstrated that there was malfeasance, and we are having a huge problem with observational data because of confounding variables in populations that have been vaccinated and unvaccinated, and an enormous rise in adverse events reporting. And he's like, oh, that's the concrete thinker, that's their position. It's like, no, their position is about the data. That sort of like, whoa, it's always some sort of like,
Yeah. There's no point in addressing the actual, sentiment that is being shared. It's just how can we categorize these people? And I've read probably 20 to 30 different papers that are looking at the psychology of a quote unquote conspiracy theorist, right? There's literally hundreds of papers out there. And the one commonality between them is very much what is seen in this sort of psychological examination as well, which is interestingly enough, this study was funded by Merck. But, but it's like what you notice is that there is always this. We can't believe that people are asking questions about government, that they don't trust government, that they want to overturn things or they want to change things, that they have these interesting questions. They're not just believing in authority. There must be something wrong with them. That is always the position. And the explanations that they provide, well, they just want everything to be concrete or they're uncomfortable with ambiguity, whatever. It's like you could take any of those explanations and flip it over to the opposing side and they would fit as well, right? Like I could easily make the exact same arguments about the people that are super pro-vax that, believe everything the government says. Like you're afraid of questioning your government. You're afraid that, the solid foundation of you believe everything your government says, you're afraid of that coming out from under you, right? Like you could make the arguments and yet only, that side believes that it's like that, in terms of the way that they present it.
Yeah. Yes. Well said. In that particular meeting, I phrased it like this. I said, look, for someone who doesn't understand the science and doesn't know what to believe, they look at the two sides arguing here as mirror images of each other. I don't know. Did we talk about it last time?
We did, yeah.
We did? Yeah. So like they both are saying that the other side is gullible, that they're listening to the wrong information, and because they're doing that, they're harming people. That's how they view both sides. But listen, one side is saying, can we talk about it? Can we come together and, find out where we disagree and maybe we can help each other? And the other side is saying, whoa, no. You don't get to say anything. Only we get to. How do you think those people are going to choose? Do you really think they're going to go with the ones that say, no, we should not have any kind of argument? That's why it's like, bring on the experts. But, to them, it's a danger. And that's why they're failing. That's the way I'm trying to get people inside of this sphere to notice that they're probably on a fool's mission to try to convert everybody if they don't want to engage them.
Yeah, their position is just the right messaging, the right thing. Or if we could, help fix the cognitive behavioral patterns of these people, then we'll get through to them and they'll get the vaccine. As opposed to you're still failing to answer their very good questions. Is essentially what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. I mean, that's who's left in many ways. They're independent of how much they know about the data. They now are hearing the voices of reason that are credentialed and are qualified to speak on it. So they have a basis now.
And to be fair, I know a lot of people who are vaccinated. I can speak to at least anecdotally here in Canada that I've spoken to that are fully vaccinated that have said, I will not get another one. And it's because as time has gone on and they've seen that the certainty that the mainstream pushed did not match the reality, now they're significantly more hesitant. And so even this concept they have of like, well, there's only this small group of hesitant people. I think at this point, the hesitancy is much greater than it was, before, because now even the people who are fully vaccinated are hesitant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yes, and they, in this particular large group of people who have a lot of skin in the game, their attitude is like, oh, and this is kind of concerning, like, well, it's the perceived threat is so much lower now. That's why they're not getting vaccinated, which is a little scary. I don't know what they're pretending.
They seem out of touch. That's the interesting piece to it, right?
Yeah. Well, if that's their solution to generate fear, we have to keep our eyes open.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to predict anything, but, that's in their minds.
For sure.
I believe that in this large group of people at the conference, a lot of them, are not doctors. They're not seeing patients. A lot of them are just, tech industry people who do their stuff, and they were brought in to do their exhibits to bring in more business and network with other people. And then there are the people that are on top of them who are doing the research, let's say.
Yeah.
And they're doing it. They're doing it with conscientiousness. They think that they're doing the right thing. I think there's only a very, very few people that were there that understand the ambiguity and the lack of certainty, but continue to drive it home that they're certain that these products are very safe and effective. And that's what I'd like to talk about next, because one of the people in the middle is this Professor Katie Atwell from Western Australia. Now, she, at a couple of times, she was always the one that as soon as I said, let's engage with the other side, she would stand up and say, well, in my research, it's better not to engage. So I finally was able to confront her face to face. And, I took some lessons from you, Joe. You've asked me, so what was her body language like? What was it like? And so I was noticing it this time, and she was flummoxed. She wanted to hurry it up, like, oh, is it you again? And can you hold on a second? I want to talk to this other person before they leave. And I waited there patiently. And then finally she said, okay, look, can you just walk with me? I want to get a cup of coffee. I'm like, okay, I'll walk with you. And, she started walking at one of these speed walkers, just like cruising down the esplanade. And I was keeping up with her, and she was saying hi to people, like looking around. And I'm saying, look, Katie, I understand. You're smart enough to know that I'm a skeptic. I didn't say that I'm a anti-vax. I'm saying I'm a skeptic. And she's like, yeah, I know. And I said, look, this is what's on the line here, because if you blow this time with the messaging that you want to come up with, this mRNA platform may be an amazing way to make vaccines quickly. I don't think I don't think we're making effective or safe vaccines with it yet, but this could be the way. But you're blowing all of your credibility if you don't address the questions, because next time, when there is a next time, and it sounds like you guys are pretty sure there'll be a next time, it could be even a more virulent pathogenic virus, and you may have a better vaccine, but no one's going to take it. What's the point of making an amazing vaccine if no one's going to let you inject it, right? Isn't it time that we actually, it's not just getting this vaccine into people. It's like, what about the future? What about the billions of dollars that you're going to lose if you don't address the question now? And she's like, yeah, that's a good point. And then I said, look, we have to. Are you aware of the problems with the Pfizer trial? She said, yeah, I heard something, but no, I don't. I'm not familiar with it. And I said, so what are you familiar with exactly? She said, well, in Australia, we have the highest uptake, one of the highest uptakes, and we did better than you. That's why we did better. And I said, well, what about all of the countries that had low uptake that did better than you? Are there some like that? Yeah, of course, Africa and, Asian countries, there's a lot of countries like that. And, that was just like, whoa, I didn't realize that. And her point was, look, the difference, and she was basically saying, in your country, I wish I could do an Australian accent, you're still allowing medical and religious exemptions.
Yeah.
But we don't do that in Australia. Unless there is a clear, specific medical exemption, you must get vaccinated in Australia.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, that's not the case here. You can't get a doctor to write you a religious exemption here. I mean, there's maybe a handful. But notice, you understand that the only way to get a medical exemption in this country is you have to say that the person is allergic to a component that is in the vaccine. And if you can't prove that, then, the boards come after you and say, well, that's not a legitimate medical exemption. What's in the vaccine? How do you know? Where's the list of ingredients? You see that actually this whole argument you're using is pointless, because it doesn't matter. We're not actually writing all of these medical exemptions. That is not why people are not getting vaccinated in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no response from her at all. And each time she kept saying, "Oh yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point." But finally, I let her, enjoy her coffee without me, uh, barking at her. But when I went home, I looked her up, and she was the one that's saying, "Oh my goodness, the anti-vax movement has in 2021 had $4 million of donations, and now it's up to $20 million." And I was like, "How can you possibly say that? Look where you're sitting.
Yeah.
This like we spent. I'm sure you guys spent tens of millions of dollars to put this thing on.
Yeah.
And by the way, there was no free coffee or food.
Oh, come on.
Yes, no free baristas there. And if you look at her funding, she has gotten about $2 million of funding herself from Australian governments that are looking to, increase uptake. Basically, that's her research. Like, how do you get vaccine uptake increased?
Yeah, and it's. I mean, I think this is like super provisional, but I'm just kind of looking at, just for the sake of it while you're talking. It seems like in 2022, Australia had some quite a rise in all-cause mortality that seems a little bit off the normal, I guess, path, you could say.
Yeah.
Almost makes me wonder, like, their massive vaccine uptake. I mean, why would they have these rises? And what do you mean you did better? I don't know. There's some interesting. This is very preliminary. I haven't looked into it deep enough, but I just decided to look at a couple graphs, and it seems a little odd.
Yeah. Well, yes, there's oddities there that are not easily explained. You could go that it's better than in other countries, and it's because of our uptake. But you cannot say, well, do you think it's potentially from your high uptake of vaccines that all-cause mortality has increased now? And, their answer is like, of course not, because we know that they're safe. It must be from long COVID. That's the go-to. Or it must have been from the lockdowns I believe they had lockdowns in Australia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Like real lockdowns. Anyway, so that was the Katie Atwell. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is an exchange I had with Ofer Levy, who was another big person in the FDA advisory committee, and he is a professor of pediatrics and I think infectious diseases at Harvard, and has been a big voice in the regulatory sphere as a scientist and physician. And this particular panel, the topic was, how do we find markers for protection?
Yeah.
Right. And the idea here is like, can we measure something in a person we vaccinated to give us some confidence that they will in fact be able to protect themselves against severe outcomes or hospitalization, death? We don't have that. Like, he admits that we don't have that.
Yeah.
The big hypocrisy is that's what we're using to authorize the bivalent booster.
Yeah.
That is what we're using to authorize the pediatric formulation of the primary series. It wasn't outcomes at all. It was like, oh, they have a large number of antibodies after we gave them the vaccine, so it must be working. But his own panel has come forward over a year ago saying that's not good enough. We need something better. But nevertheless, that's what we're doing, and we're continuing to do that. So I like what he's saying. He's like, well, we need to be able to, find some way to molecularly demonstrate that it works without actually demonstrating that it works.
Yeah.
And so I said to him, look, I get it. Good for you. But why not, while you're, testing your theory that this particular marker or that marker is a surrogate for protection, why not conduct the trials that also look at outcomes as well as, the surrogate? So you can prove that it works. Mm-hmm. Because the people in my community know that, there are no outcome data.
Yeah.
And so this is what happened next. He said, well, yeah, I wish we could do that. But in order to detect a signal, in other words, in order to detect a difference between the vaccinated and unvaccinated, you would need a very, very large study.
Yeah.
Why? It's because the signal is so small.
Yeah.
So, he's basically saying the vaccines barely give you any benefit in terms of outcomes.
Yeah.
In order to prove it, you need to do a huge study.
Yeah.
And then I had to go back to the mic and say, if the signal is so small, why are you mandating it? Why are you pushing so hard to give this? And that's when the moderator of that panel, Jennifer Margaret Harries, who was the director of the UK Health Health Surveillance Security Agency, stepped in and said, "Okay, well, now we're getting off track here. Next question." It's like,
Yeah.
well,
Shut it down.
Shut it down.
Yeah.
Then again, people around me, I sat down, they're like, "Yeah, that's a really good question." Like, I had people come up to me outside saying, "Yeah, I really appreciate your question, and I don't think it got answered."
It feels again like the political arm shutting down the academic arm. The academic arm sees, they're smart enough, they can see that this doesn't make any sense, are willing to talk about it, but then the political arm comes in and says, "No, let's not go there." So it's almost like they also have different agendas. I mean, that technically by job description they do, but that's interesting because we hear from the political side, we're following the science. It's like, well, clearly you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. One little thing here. I know we have a sequence that we're going to go through, but I actually sat through another interesting. This was a purely scientific presentation. It was someone that worked for, I think it's called the NCI. It's a group within the NIH. It's got funding from the National Cancer Institute. And they were looking at how do you design a better lipid nanoparticle, right? And here's something that doesn't get talked about very often. But this person was saying, oh, absolutely. Like if you put the right kinds of nanoparticles on the lipid bubble, the lipid nanoparticle, you can generate a greater immune response, like a cytokine response. Now, this is interesting. This is basically, they're using the lipid bilayer as an adjuvant. Mm-hmm. And, in case your audience doesn't understand, like vaccines, if you just put the virus in there, or whatever you're putting in there, it doesn't give you immunity because your body's like blowing it off. It's like, it's not good enough for me to mount a real response. So over the years, we've been using like thimerosal and aluminum and stuff that's very, very toxic to get the body excited about this, right? Yeah. But she's saying that, you can use the lipid nanoparticle, which encapsulates the mRNA, to give you the response that you're looking for, depending on how you design it. So that's a big part of this. And it's also potentially why people get symptoms very, very quickly after getting injected, because the stuff is toxic and it goes into a lot of places. It's not necessarily the spike protein. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So she finished her presentation, and then I talked to her specifically, and I said, do you know about modulating these lipid nanoparticles with your small nanoparticles that you attach to it? How does it affect where this stuff goes in your body?
Yeah. And
she said, well, it mainly goes to the liver and spleen. And I said, what about the brain? Have you looked at that? Because it's really good if you're delivering, chemotherapeutic agents to the brain, but you don't want to send your vaccines to the brain, right?
Yeah.
And she said, oh, yeah, we don't know. There's a lot of research. She said, yes, there's an effect, and we don't know what it is.
Right. So this whole time when people were saying, hey, we don't know where the vaccine's going to end up, versus the idea that, hey, it's just going to stay at the injection site, from the industry, are you saying that at least that person within the industry who's done the research has said, yes, we don't know?
Well, I don't think she's within the industry. She's a researcher that's publicly funded. In other words, part of the government, and they also, collaborate with industry. But she is a hardcore researcher. She's not setting policy. She's not being a spokesperson for the vaccine industry. She's just saying that the science says that we don't know enough.
We don't know. Right.
We don't know, not like where it goes, but what we do to the lipid nanoparticle will affect how much of it goes through the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting point. And then my colleague who was there, Dr. Liz Mumper, who is a pediatrician, really smart, she was able to pose the very last question of the entire symposium. Once again, it was a plenary meeting where everyone got together. Greg Poland was moderating it, and right before, what caused her to ask the question, and this was a question that came up from a statement that was being made by one of the researchers about predicting the durability of the vaccine. Like, how can we tell how long this thing is going to last? Because, durability, you start telling people that this thing is only going to last 6 months or 5 months or 4 months. Now you don't have uptake anymore. So we want to make a more durable vaccine. Is there a way to make that? And this person was saying, well, he veered from the topic, and he noticed that in early 2020, they were following babies who got sick with COVID, like when they were very, very young, and followed them for 2 or 3 years. And what they found was that they had amazing resistance to COVID 3 years later, like better than most age groups. And, we have to understand why, why could that be? I wonder, maybe they're not, it brought up a lot of questions, something to look at to make more durable vaccines, perhaps. And so Dr. Mumper took the microphone and said, I'm a pediatrician, and I would like to know why we should be, given the fact that the survival rate for children is 99.997%, and we have no idea what the danger of this vaccine is in the long term, and they have incredible immunity if they get sick. How am I supposed to tell a mother to get vaccinated? What would be the rationale? And the first thing that was said was, I don't know. That's what they said. Mm-hmm. Then the next person was like, oh, wait a minute. Look, doctor, you're somehow saying that it's better to get COVID-19 than get vaccinated. But we don't know what the long-term sequelae is of a COVID-19 infection. So, there you are. And end of the symposium. That's when Poland jumped in and went on. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. He's basically saying that you don't know what the long-term side effects of the vaccine are either. So that you didn't answer the question at all.
Right.
Once again, the thrust of a very, very important question was completely ignored.
Down. Yeah, that's fascinating again, because I would love to just hear, instead of having to guess, like what would his response actually be if she got a chance to just say, yeah, but you also don't know the long-term consequence of the vaccine. So why are we doing this? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And just to hear what they would say, even if he had a reasonable answer, even if it was as simple as, oh, well, we have greater faith in the vaccine, like whatever. But, to just not answer the questions is troublesome.
It is very troublesome, and they've been able to avoid it because, when they get interviewed, they don't get questions like this.
Right.
They never do. They're just, and that's, we're just a small group of people trying to go in there and probe them a little bit, and they don't have good responses. That's why they don't get asked these questions in front of a camera that is feeding 10 million, TV screens.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of a little bit speechless. I think I've said all I can really say on this. I mean, it's a, I'm glad you guys did this. I'm very curious to see if who knows, maybe we start seeing a little bit of a change in the way some folks are brought to the table to actually maybe debate or maybe discuss some of these issues. Maybe somebody thinks that what you brought up was a good idea, and somehow it gets passed around. Yes, we need to engage the other side in legitimate debate. Or we'll see what happens. But I, appreciate what you guys did. I think this is a really important exercise, and not only seeing what's going on inside, the industry where it's just pretty much industry people, but also, to be able to plant a seed in their minds and see what happens.
That's the hope, and look, I want to shout out to Children's Health Defense. They're the ones that funded the quite expensive ticket to get in for 4 days, and they took care of me. So I hope your audience will go check out what we're doing over there. I intend to have something on the Defender that summarizes this in much more detail, and hopefully do a couple of presentations over there with Dr. Mumper. But kudos to them and their fight. It's very interesting because there was a couple of representatives from CHD outside handing out flyers, and I met up with them for dinner afterwards, and they had some interesting stories to tell. One had to do, they're handing out Ed Dowd's book, which is called "Died Suddenly," I think, and flyers that had information like data about like what we actually know. And they said they were able to hand out everything they had, like hundreds of flyers. I don't know if they're going to be read, but we have a picture of one of our folks giving Peter Hotez, who is possibly the biggest parrot of this orthodoxy, a book, and he's like, he's taking it, but then a bunch of the security people came over and said, no, he doesn't want that.
Yeah.
And we had a van that has like it's like a billboard van, that has generated images on 3 sides from Children's Health Defense, driving around the conference center, like putting up pictures of, be a defender and images of Maddie DeGarry and, protect your kids. So, you got to hand it to this organization. I'm really proud to be able to participate for them.
Nice. And I mean, can you share the last anecdote that we didn't get to about you explain it, but it is anecdote at this point.
Well, the reason why I bring it up is at the very end, Greg Poland said something like, well, we all know that, I mean, everybody in this room has been vaccinated. I mean, I think so, right? Just another assumption. And I found out that one of our colleagues outside that was handing out flyers talked to a researcher. I'm not going to say whom, or I'm not going to say which organization. And that person said, "Oh yeah, half the people in her never got the job."
In her company.
Yeah. And so I was like, really? I mean, that's another interesting point here, because what really is the vaccine uptake? I'm certain that it's being exaggerated. There are people out there that are saying they're vaccinated, but they're not. And quite frankly, I would be shocked if all of those people with all of those degrees and all of that money haven't actually looked at the data, and they just willingly rolled up their sleeves and got this thing. I mean, that would be a sorry state of affairs for science.
Yeah.
There must be dissenters. So that's encouraging. Maybe this person will come forward later and confirm things about, is it true, or is she also, making things up? I don't know. This is just anecdotal.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's all. We'll find out what happens. If you guys didn't watch the first part to this, be sure to go back and check it out. And Madhava, thanks again for not only coming on and sharing what you're sharing, but doing the work that you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome, Joe. Thanks for having me on. Thanks everyone for checking in. And again, tell us how we could do this better. Please check out Children's Health Defense. I've got a lot of my content there as well.
Cool.